What if I told you that Happiest Day is far more complex than what people think? That all these kids are not who you think they are, and Happiest Day has nothing to do with the 5 kids, but rather is all about Crying Child. Now that sounds dramatic and all, but I assure you, this theory is something. This theory, if somehow true, changes everything about these minigames and the story of Crying Child as a whole. Now, I want to preface this before we move any further. This theory is a bit of a stretch, so much so that I don't believe it myself, but as I went deeper into it, I fell down a rabbit hole which made me discover a lot of connections and evidence that made this theory somehow more believable. And I thought I'd share this madness with you all. So let's start at the beginning. Like all Crying Child theories, let's start with FNAF World. In that game, our true purpose is told to us by Glitchtrap. We have to find 5 clocks and leave breadcrumbs for Crying Child to help him find his way. And when we are done, the Yellow Eyes tells Crying Child that the pieces are in place for him, and now he must find them. Now what's important to note is that these breadcrumbs are the hints that appear in Follow Me, that lets us access the Happiest Day minigames. These breadcrumbs lead to the pieces rather than actually being the pieces like some people believe. So the Shadow Cupcakes, the Code, Shadow Bonnie, and etc. These aren't the pieces, these are the breadcrumbs, the hints to help Crying Child find the minigames. So knowing that, what exactly are the pieces that Crying Child has to find? The pieces are obviously pieces of himself to put his broken soul back together. But when playing these minigames, the only real goal and the only thing you can find are the ghost kids, and when we gather all of them together, they become free. But what does that have to do with Crying Child? You might have heard the term Shadow Victim thrown around when mentioning Bite Victim, and for good reason. Shadow Victim is the theory that the 5 kids have the pieces of Crying Child's soul/memories, and that's why the minigames look the way they do. And when they gather in Happiest Day, they essentially put Crying Child back together. Now that is a very valid theory, but something that has always bothered me about this theory is how did part of Crying Child's soul possess the core 4 when they weren't even created yet? Or at least they were very far away for Crying Child to possess. Some theorists explain away this problem by saying that maybe the puppet put pieces of Crying Child into the souls, or Crying Child has an emotional attachment to the characters, so he possessed the animatronics. But for the former, the puppet would not purposefully put Crying Child's soul into different things. If she wanted to free Crying Child, why wouldn't she just put the pieces together and make him be set free? And for the latter, it's not like Crying Child has an emotional attachment to the core 4 to possess them, since he's scared of the animatronics. So while Shadow Victim is a very good theory, its one big flaw is how it would happen in the first place. So if the missing kids don't have the pieces of Crying Child, what exactly are the pieces that Yellow Eyes are referring to? And that's when a crazy idea finally hit me. What if again these kids are the pieces, but these aren't the missing kids? What if all these kids are Crying Child? Or more specifically, what if all these kids are his plushies that he possessed? I know, this is just a ridiculous thing to claim, and it is. I know this is a large assumption to make, and I somewhat don't believe in this theory myself, but when I delved deeper into this idea, I came across a lot of interesting connections that I think is interesting nonetheless. To delve deeper into this theory, let's first ask the question, how would this work? Like I mentioned, we have what Yellow Eyes tells us, and how the pieces are in place for Crying Child to find, and the only thing we find in these minigames are the souls. But why are the souls in these different realms? Well, like Shadow Victim, these souls have specific memories of Crying Child. BB's Air Adventure is connected to the BB Kid, Mangle's Quest is connected to the Mangle Toy, Chica's Party is connected to the Toy Girl, the Fredbear minigame is self-explanatory, Shadow Bonnie's minigame could harken back to that specific shadow in the minigames, or maybe is a reminder of what Crying Child saw, and lastly, Happiest Day is similar to the layout of Fredbear's. But if all these kids are Crying Child's soul, why would they all have different masks each? One idea I've come up with is that this could harken back to FNAF 4 and how the plushies were Crying Child's friends. And so each part of Crying Child's soul would attach themselves into these friends, and would essentially bring those friends to life. Now again, I know what I'm saying is crazy, but this specific point is not baseless. In the novel trilogy, after Charlotte was kidnapped and killed, Henry would cry over Charlotte's plushie, Ella, for months, and as he delved deeper into depression, he would start pretending that Ella was Charlotte. All the while his tears would pour on the doll, which resulted into him putting a part of himself into the doll, and eventually give it life. And because he pretended that the Ella doll was his daughter, even putting her in the Charlie box, that doll would become what Henry wanted it to be. And this isn't just the pre-recorded memories that Henry made. Some memories we see are from the possessed ragdoll itself, before the bots were even created. And the doll has memories from Henry himself. So the same thing could apply to Crying Child. All of these guys are the pieces of Crying Child that latched onto the plushies, and all of them are technically different entities, but they are still a part of him, and even have some of his memories that make the realm the way it is. Since we see him cry all the time, and we see he considers the plushies his friends, it wouldn't be much of an assumption that his tears would pour onto the dolls, and maybe a part of himself latched onto them, and these possessed plushies would over time think they were Crying Child's friends, creating their own memories. And these possessed plushies would appear in the spirit world as his friends, made from Crying Child's soul. But what about the puppet? How is he a part of Crying Child's soul, if the kid didn't even have a puppet plushie? Well, the reason it looks like the puppet would be because maybe the Crying Child himself looks like the puppet. They have similar designs, and even Shadow Puppet has the same pose as Crying Child as he dies on the Night 6 minigame. And for those reasons, this Crying Child would be the main soul of Crying Child, the one who we last saw in the Night 6 minigame, and the one that talked to Yellow Eyes, and the one that turns into the different characters in each Happiest Day minigame. But how can multiple spirits of the same person exist at the same time and place? Interestingly enough, soul splitting has happened before. In the fourth closet, when William melted the endos of the 5 animatronics together, William was able to manipulate the kids into giving a part of themselves to be put into the Funtimes. But that resulted in them further forgetting their memories, and their soul literally split. When Carlton enters the ghost world, he sees multiples of the same child spirit. All of them are chasing around pages of a larger drawing, trying to put them together to be whole again. However, the only soul that is still fully intact is the soul of Golden Freddy, Michael Brooks, who tries to complete the full drawing and make his friends whole again. And when Carlton asks what Michael is doing, he says, and I quote, "I have to put them back together." When Carlton helps Michael and merges the pages into Michael's drawing, the duplicates of the same kid merges together, and they started to remember more of themselves. Another example is in Frights, where Andrew was able to put part of himself into a lot of toys in Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center. So multiple souls of the same person is possible in the FNAF universe, and I suspect that it's what happened to Crying Child. Happiest Day could be trying to inverse Crying Child's death. In FNAF 4, his plushies were disappearing as he was dying, so his objective is to find these guys that disappeared and once again be together, and have the birthday party that he missed with all of his true friends. This all led me to the conclusion that the kid with the Golden Freddy mask is the final speaker, and is also Yellow Eyes / Glitchbear. One interesting bit is the fact that there is no hint for accessing Happiest Day. We don't leave a breadcrumb for it, which means that Crying Child already knows how to access Happiest Day. That adds on to the fact that the Golden Freddy kit is the yellow eyes. So when Crying Child finds the pieces and brings them all to the Golden Freddy kid, he, like he promised, will put them back together, and they combine into one and are all set free. Of course, with making a theory as insane as mine, I can't ignore the large problems with it. First off, if we get the good ending in FNAF 3, the screen shows us the masks of the animatronics finally resting, which has nothing to do with Crying Child. But then again, Scott intentionally made Crying Child connected to Happiest Day after FNAF 3. Second point, the logbook has the puppet giving cake to a little girl in a page about Happiest Day. Third, Return to the Pit has a whole ending which is just Happiest Day again, minus the puppet, which has nothing to do with Crying Child. But again, Crying Child is heavily connected to Happiest Day because of FNAF World. Fourth, if this was true, this would just be a blatant retcon to FNAF 3's story. However, it's not like Happiest Day freed the souls anyway, because the souls later return in Sister Location and FNAF 6. And lastly, if FNAF 4 was the final game like what Scott originally intended, this theory would leave the fate of the missing children truly unsolved. However, the last 2 points is important for another reason. Last thing I want to talk about is how the role of Crying Child could have been the thing that changed the fates of the original 6 kids. On February 18th, 2016, Scott posted this obscure teaser. This would be later revealed as the first teaser for the new game Sister Location. But what's interesting is that a day later, on February 19th, 2016, the first FNAF World Update 2 teaser was uploaded. On its own, there is nothing really noteworthy. Sister Location was teased at the end of FNAF World Update 2 after all. But what's really interesting is that the metadata of that FNAF World teaser contained a hidden message, which read, "He put the pieces back together." This line tells us for a fact that Crying Child found the pieces and was able to put himself back together and be free. This is interesting because the fact that Crying Child put the pieces back together and then we are teased to Sister Location shows us that, in my opinion, Crying Child's story was over before Sister Location released, closing his chapter in the 4 games and moving on with his sister in the next titles. And that would turn out to be true, since Crying Child never appeared again in an important role in the next games. But for some reason, the 5 kids and Charlotte were still present, even after Happiest Day, which means their story wasn't done, while Crying Child's was. And the only game that has at least an ending to Crying Child's story is FNAF 3. What I'm saying is that Happiest Day definitely was about the 5 kids and the puppet when FNAF 3 first released. But when FNAF 4 released, Scott added Crying Child into the story of these minigames, and that was the end of his story along with the other kids. But when FNAF 4 wasn't a satisfying ending for him and the fans, he made Sister Location and chose to ignore Happiest Day, or change the details of that minigame to bring back the 5 kids and end their story in the 6th game, which left Happiest Day with only the elements of Crying Child's story. But this again is a huge assumption, which is what this theory is. So if you found this theory interesting, please comment down below what you think. And while you're down there, please like, subscribe, all that jazz, and I'll see you next time. See you on the flip side.